don't know what she looks like. Oh, wow. I don't see anybody I recognize. I should recognize her, really. Hi, nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you. I actually met you briefly
yes,
at the
yeah.
in-person meeting.
How did you get involved with the regional plan, people here in San Diego, and what's your background that you have in this issue?
Oh, well, thanks for asking. Well, I am the CEO and principal of Focus Strategies, which is a consulting firm based in Sacramento, and this is all that we do. So I've spent my whole career working on homelessness, and my intention in college, actually, when I was about 19 or 20, was that I wanted to work on homelessness. So I've sort of spent my career looking for the way that I could help make the biggest impact, so house as many people as possible and reduce homelessness as much as possible. So at Focus Strategies, we have a team of people, and we have a great array of skill sets. So we do a lot of data analysis and a lot of system planning. This is actually our first time working in this way in San Diego. We've done a little work here in the past. But actually the regional task force put out an RFP. They were looking for bidders. And so we put a bid in to do this community plan, and we were awarded the contract. So the contract is actually with the regional task force, which is great because the co-chairs, as you know, the new co-chairs are elected officials from the city and the county, the city of San Diego and the county. So there's a lot of participation and commitment from the elected leadership as well as the business community and others who sit on that body.
That's interesting. I like the way that you explained it during the meeting. You would say something and you would back it up with data that you had. And this is what's happened in other cities. And
we work hard to pull in data and information from other places, but in the end, this plan will be based on San Diego's data. So we'll actually look at who is homeless in San Diego and what the needs are, and how to best get to having the right number of housing opportunities to eventually, hopefully, house everybody.
I was always curious, like, how do you come to those numbers? Like how many, not beds, but how many houses do we need? How many people are actually out of the homeless community? It's like, how do you figure that out? Does the plan get to a certain number of beds that we're going to need? Or?
Yes. So while we're looking at the overall population dynamics and how the whole flow of people entering and exiting homelessness impacts the total need that you have for each type, we will make recommendations about the number of emergency shelter beds, for example, that you need, the number of permanent supportive housing units that you need, rapid rehousing slots, et cetera. And because San Diego has such a profound affordable housing crisis, inevitably we'll talk about the need to continue to build tens of thousands of units in the region, and how important that is to alleviating poverty and the effects of homelessness and homelessness overall. But within that, we'll very specifically talk about the interventions needed for each person experiencing homelessness.
Could you tell me a little bit about the process and creating this plan?
Yes. So what we have is a two-phased plan. So the first phase, which we're in right now, and which will be complete on June 30th, is to come up with a strategic framework to end homelessness in the region. And that framework is, the purpose of it is to set a clear goal that hopefully all of the jurisdictions and stakeholders, leadership can all agree that ending homelessness in the region with a set of interventions that some of which exist, some of which are under development, some of which are to come, that they all need to fit together into one coherent system. So by June 30th, we'll have completed a strategic framework, and then phase 2, which is proposed, and hopefully is going to get the green light, and I believe it will. That will be from July through June, so it'll be a 12-month process. And the goal of that process will be to end in a very specific implementation plan that includes the results of all the analytics that we talked about, so that there's a specific number of types of interventions that are called for given who is homeless in your community and how you're performing now, where there are areas where programs could improve. Because a lot of the analytic work we're doing is looking at how well is it working. So we'll make targeted improvement recommendations. So all those things will then kind of come together and be woven together with all of the different initiatives that are underway right now. And the goal is to have that all under one umbrella.
You all have in your mind the plan already, how it's going to be, or is it a process that you're both with us developing along the way?
That's great. Both.
Both, okay.
So because there are significant initiatives that have been very successful in other jurisdictions, best practices, there are things here in San Diego that are currently existing that are working really well. We've heard about them. We haven't looked at the data yet, but I trust we'll find those bright spots. Every community has some good bright spots. Those are the things you have to build on. And so we kind of already know what those are, what they look like. And then most communities find their areas in need of improvement because performance may be below what people think it is or want it to be. And so, that tends to look a certain way based on best practices and evidence about what's worked in other places. And then there's also the new element, which is as we go around and talk with folks, so part of this phase 1 that'll be done at the end of June, we're interviewing elected officials from cities and the county. We are also interviewing department heads and other leaders who oversee the use of public resources. We're also doing more than 15 interviews with providers, so those nonprofits who actually run the programs and work on homelessness directly in the community. And we're also doing a number of key stakeholders, which may not be direct service providers, they may be business leaders, other people who are really engaged in the issue. And then once this phase is complete, what we have proposed in the next phase includes a really significant process which has both provider interviews and more than interviews at that point. It's really, we've proposed a learning collaborative to sort of get all the providers together to learn new strategies, learn from each other, and improve. And we have a number of focus groups with people experiencing homelessness proposed, so that hopefully everybody is working together.
Wow, that's great. A lot of details. A lot of work. When can the public be involved and what can they do?
In the planning process itself, people can be involved by contacting the Regional Task Force on the Homeless and learning about their meeting schedule, checking out their website, showing up to the meetings. Also, I would really recommend that anybody who's interested in homelessness being reduced in the community to really pay attention to their local city, whichever city in the county they're in, and listen for items on the agenda, and when affordable housing developers bring projects up, that people need to show up and support. And go down to the podium during public comment and say you're in support, so that there can be success.
We went to one of those meetings. There's a lot of angry people. Well, a few, not a lot.
A few loud ones, usually.
How old are they?
They're 9.
9.
9-year-old, 2 boys.
I had 2 kids for a while. They weren't mine, they were my girlfriend's, but they push you to the limit. We were wrestling one day and he hit me in the face. I said, now don't wrestle, you don't hit the other person in the face, you can wrestle with other parts of the body. So the next day he came to me, running across the room right to my face and goes, I'm not touching you. Technically you're right, David.
Parenting is not for the faint of heart.
Thank you. You're welcome. Oh, I thought you said pear. You said pure.
No, pear.
Okay. And we've heard of systems change. What does that mean?
So in most places in the country, homelessness, as it became a local issue, communities, people who cared passionately about homelessness created programs and shelters, and they responded organically to homelessness. So really what we have all over the country and in San Diego, including in San Diego, is this whole array of programs that are run by individual agencies that have their own mission their own approach, their own way of seeing homelessness and the world and their interaction in the community. You could maybe think of it sort of like a medical system where say what you had was actually just a bunch of individual clinics and doctor's offices. Well, you might have 1,000 cardiologists and only 2 primary care providers, which actually doesn't tend to meet the need. But you have what you have because if you don't have a system in place that has the right amount of each type of professional and the right amount of each intervention, the right amount of each type of equipment, then what you get is well-meaning, skilled people who are doing things to work on the issue. And so right now where we are as a country is really every system is in some process. Some are further along than others in creating out of those individual agencies with those individual approaches actually coming together and making one system that has things like coordinated entry, where everybody is assessed and then referred to the most efficient resource to address their homelessness and their immediate needs.
It seems mandatory to have something like that. You have to have everybody on the same page.
It is increasingly mandatory because the federal government now requires that you have a coordinated entry. It's also required that you invest in the intervention types that most efficiently house people. And the reality is that coordinated entry, as an example, is an incredibly difficult change to make. And it's really hard for a lot of reasons, but one of them is, all those individual agencies and programs that have done their best with the resources that they've had for all these years now has to be part of a greater whole that sees things more similarly.
And some of the things they're doing are good. I have an issue with one of them. And but if they weren't around, it would be a lot worse in San Diego. I mean, they do a good job at some of the things they do, but like you said, you got to fine tune it and get everybody on the same page. So, what are some of the challenges to implementing this coordinated entry?
There are a lot of challenges with implementing coordinated entry effectively. So some of the challenges include not having enough housing exits. So the only way that you have really efficient coordinated entry is if people enter and you can exit them to housing. So you have to be at scale with the intervention types that you have to really see a dramatic effectiveness, to really see people are getting something and leaving homelessness and kind of see results over time. It's also incredibly difficult in the absence of having housing at scale like that available or housing opportunities available. You have to be able to take in just the right number of people into your coordinated entry that you actually do have exits for. And you have to be able to prioritize efficiently, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And there's different tools and strategies and ways that people try to do that. And the reality is that on the receiving end, it has to be for coordinated entry to work. You have to have coordinated exit. So all the programs that you need to refer people to. So the highest need person needs to get the next available resource. That means that program or that agency has to be willing to take that person, even if that person has attributes that they wouldn't typically work with. So they have to lower their barriers to program entry, and that's really difficult. It does, in many cases, mean that agencies have to really rethink their approach, and in some cases even their mission, and how they see homelessness in order to participate at that level. So those are some of the huge challenges. And then I'll also just say on a technical level, the challenge of talking with people, quickly and efficiently getting them into an available bed, for example, a shelter bed, and then quickly and efficiently getting them into permanent housing requires a number of technical steps. You've got to enter the data, the bed has to be available, you have to get the person to the bed, you have to be able to get somebody to the housing resource, and that agency has to accept them. And the rules, as I'm sure you know all too well, the rules about who can get what are sometimes provider created, but they're also very often funder created. So not every person is eligible for everything. So, the complications involved in making coordinated entry really efficient are significant and should not be underestimated in the planning process, because you need a lot of really good technical people working to make it happen and to continuously troubleshoot.
Yes.
But there are some communities that are doing a good job.
Yeah.
This is coordinated entry, but it's actually all parts of the system, which is having resources available to really do effective training and have, provider agencies, provider agencies that have multiple, layers and significant size, having every person really understand what the objectives are and have the tools and resources that they need to not only understand this new vision and way of doing things, but to have the skills to be able to execute them is another really significant challenge.
How do you ensure that you have a balance with people coming in and people getting service?
Communities need to really be doing effective outreach, so really going out and talking with people. And every community does need to know who's out there and how many people are out there and what their challenges are. So they should be entering them in the system, everybody in the system in that way. And then when you get to the step of assessing people for the housing resources available, figuring out who do you prioritize for housing, really some of the things that we recommend doing are to prioritize based on the housing opportunities you actually have available, so that you're not just sort of creating a huge long list that you have no way of working through a list of 1,000 people if you have, say, 20 housing opportunities that month or something. So really that part is around scale, and it puts a lot of urgency on scaling up those housing exits and making sure that every effort the community is making is around getting people housed. So it's about having the least expensive solution to each person's homelessness, so you have the next bit of money available for the next person, which is a very thin way of doing things, which has to be the case when you don't have enough resources to really help everybody as much as you would like. Another key issue is making sure that you're diverting people from becoming homeless in the first place. So a lot of prevention efforts have historically been a little more upstream, which can be incredibly valuable anti-poverty housing stability efforts. And more recently, there's been a real push to doing shelter diversion work, which is diverting people from ever entering the homeless system. So instead of sort of welcoming everybody into homelessness and into the homeless system when people are at that point, the idea is that you connect with people and figure out, is there a way that they can safely return to the housing that they are contemplating leaving or being asked to leave right now? Or is there another family or friend connection that could be reestablished, or some mediation work that could be done, some light assistance that could help recreate that connection so that folks could be immediately housed instead of entering homelessness? That turns out to be an incredibly important tool in the toolbox, and especially in San Diego, where rents are high and the housing stock is so low, preserving and maintaining housing has to be the first priority, so that we can significantly slow the number of people entering homelessness.
What can the general public do after this regional plan is implemented?
First thing I would say in terms of what the public can do to continue to be involved, because the plan includes a lot of implementation. So, we anticipate the whole next year that we're involved, next 14 months, what will happen is there'll be a lot of implementation that's happening at the same time that a lot of data analysis and planning is happening, so that progress continues to be made while more refined recommendations are made that are really targeted to who's homeless here and what they need. And so that's all what'll happen leading up to having a final implementation plan. But then the community actually has to do that work, which is a big lift. People get involved when they see something that disturbs them or upsets them or excites them, and then the pace of change is often frustrating to people. These are really hard systems changes, as we were talking about earlier, that involve so many people and so many agencies, and it does take time. So I think really encouraging that ongoing participation. The plan itself will have specific dates and projections for when each step should be accomplished. So one way the public can be involved is to take that information, to show up at the regional task force and the other public meetings and events and ask how things are going in terms of meeting those objectives, and show that they care and want this to be accomplished, because that kind of ongoing advocacy and support will help this stay elevated enough to keep it moving forward. Every time an affordable housing project comes before any public body, having folks show up strongly in support is incredibly impactful and needed. While it's unlikely you're going to build your way out of homelessness here in San Diego, you also can't be successful without more housing. It's a both and. So we've got to just keep doing that. And you got to have support.
Do you see that as probably one of the biggest problems in San Diego, that not having enough housing? In comparison to other cities?
The whole West Coast is actually like that, and increasingly like that. So the total number of units that are rented to people with extremely low incomes at the rent levels they can afford is smaller and smaller. And that's certainly a really significant factor that has to be addressed. And that is really significant and not to be underestimated. And at the exact same time, even when the rents are much lower, think back to just after the Great Recession, you didn't see homelessness disappear. And that has to do with a lot of factors, but one of the most powerful ones is inefficiencies in the homeless system itself. So if we're just bringing people into homelessness and people are languishing there, then what you have is a lot of people experiencing homelessness.
Exactly.
So we have to get a lot better at moving people through to permanent housing.
That is the situation in San Diego. In this process, we all have to make changes and give a little, give in, and maybe the nonprofits here in San Diego do a wonderful job. Some of them do good at one thing and could do better at another thing. How do you get people to accept change?
That's great. That's a really great point, that people need to accept first the change on the horizon and choose it. What you just shared about your nonprofit community doing some things incredibly well, there's a lot of people working for nothing almost, and really working as hard as they can to help people as best they can. And it can sound like criticism or disrespect to have a plan that comes out that basically says you need to do all of these things differently. And so I think it is really important to message very clearly, this is not a case of bad actors. This is not a case of some folks are bad and wrong and other things are good and right. This is really a case of, as a community, we've been doing the best we can with the resources that we have for a really long time, and now there's new data, and data is now available in a way we can really look and see what our outcomes are, what the impact of the work is. That means that we can take that and we can make improvements. Some of the things that are really helpful are offering meaningful training to providers, to their staff, to managers, to really be clear about your expectations. I think it's really important for all the local funders to be carefully aligned in what they are asking of providers, so that you don't have conflicting requirements from different funders, and that everyone is helping you make the change. I think it's really important that the environment overall be supportive and encouraging of change, and also acknowledging the truth, which is, if you're going to have an effective system, that means that if agencies can't provide or choose not to provide the level of intervention in a cost-effective manner that's needed, they may not continue to be funded. And I think it's important to say that's a truth, that's a reality, but that's not the goal. The goal is to get everybody who cares, wants to end homelessness, to work together, to have the training and the resources they need, and to be able to think through and articulate their agency's mission and vision through a new lens, so that they're able to be successful in being part of this greater whole in a way that ultimately benefits the people who are sleeping outside.
One of the biggest problems in San Diego is not enough housing. What are some of the options that we could look at for housing?
Right. Well, in San Diego, with the housing market that you have, we would highly recommend that you pursue every possible option for housing. So that would include permanent supportive housing, which I know you're familiar with, and rapid rehousing, which is the shorter-term rental subsidy, and those are used in the private rental market, typically using, of course, every type of voucher you have, housing choice vouchers and so on, other publicly funded long-term vouchers. We've also seen folks having great success with shared housing, so actually putting different unrelated adults together and renting space, sometimes master leasing. So a nonprofit, for example, might lease a house or a building and put people together in roommate situations. That can be incredibly effective. Communities that are really successful really look at their specific market, their housing market, and they figure out every room, every place, and that they really help people to have some choices and move into the stock that you can find. One other strategy is really to help people move to a place that they want to live that is more affordable, really helping people determine for themselves a life they can afford is a really important strategy. So sometimes even helping people to move to a neighboring city or whatever the case might be is a really useful strategy.
I like that you focus on giving choices to people. Is there anything a small community can do within the larger community to help support this plan?
Yes. I think the most important thing to do is to be part of the larger effort, the county-wide effort, to really learn the tools and strategies that are moving forward and will be part of the community plan. Frankly, because the most important ingredient of success is having a system where all the efforts are aligned.
Yes.
And so, when you're trying to make changes and those changes are going in this direction, if one community kind of goes in the other direction, what happens is both efforts are undermined. And so it's really important to connect with the whole county-wide effort, really learn about the interventions and tools and strategies that are needed, and then work within your local city to be on that same, rowing in the same direction, in the same boat, so that you're not at cross purposes. Part of the complexity of addressing homelessness effectively is that every community is impacted and people care viscerally. People have a visceral reaction to homelessness and they care and they want to work on things. And the reality is that aligning efforts, so figuring out how you can be part of a greater whole, is complex, and it takes patience, and it takes really learning about homelessness and really learning about what's happening in each program, in each community. Sort of looking at the program data from each program in the community and see who's accomplishing the objective, sort of pulling their weight in ending homelessness in the system. And so one of the things that communities can do is really ask for that data and that information and ask for it in a digestible way. That they can look and see, okay, which programs are really high performing that I should support. Which efforts are really making a difference. And then, when you have that information, when it's readily available, you can guide community members to support those things that are really working. And that way you can achieve alignment with the overall county-wide goals within each city. There is data that's published on the Regional Task Force website, and so there's some really good information you can see there. And the next step for the system would be to have that information available by program and by community. I think that mayors generally are under enormous pressure to act now on everything, but especially on homelessness. And so one of the things that we see is that cities tend to try to do emergency measures, get out and do something now because constituents are really on fire about homelessness, sort of circling back to what constituents can do. One of the most important things is to get people to say, I don't want a Band-Aid.
Yes.
I want a solution, and I want to hear you talk about solutions, and I want this to take the time it takes. Let's work on it like it's the crisis that it is.
Yeah.
Because, people living outside, in my view, are living in crisis every day, and we have to act like that's the case, because it is the case.
Yeah.
And we also have to make smart and thoughtful policy decisions that are about creating a system, aligning all of the programs, launching the housing resources that are needed. So it takes money and it takes real technical skills.
Yeah.
And so my hope for San Diego would be that as this plan gets out and becomes more public, that we can help get folks to be supportive of the actual solutions and demand.
I think they are. I really, really think they are. More and more people come to me and they'll say, what more can we do?